schools out there that are doing great things that don't necessarily get attention. And so we're really just trying to create conversations that we wish we would have heard or had the opportunity to hear when we were going through the recruiting process, to hear about some of these coaches and some of the universities that are out there. And in doing that, we've also tapped into our Jersey roots and our Region 6 roots and had some coaches like Dan O'Cone, Jason Nace, Rob Nucci, Justin Borowski, Steve Rivera have joined us. And a lot of the fans have really responded well to the stuff we've been doing to represent New Jersey wrestling the best we can. So when we saw the results from the group tournament this past weekend, we saw that you had got back on top of the podium, and Jimmy had said, I got coach's contact. We can get him on. So we're here to have you on, talk about what you got going on at North Hunterdon now.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. All right, y'all, we're back. We're going belly to belly tonight. Last night, we wanted to thank our guest, Matt Morris, and from Monday night, Coach Adam Hall from Utah Valley as well. Tonight, as I mentioned, we're back on the mat. We are going to be talking to Coach Dave Bell from North Hunterdon High School. But before we get into that, please hit subscribe on YouTube. Follow Airey Bros on Instagram. Drop a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're enjoying what we're doing, you're getting any value out of what we're doing, maybe you find an episode that might resonate with an athlete in your family, please share that with them. But as well, click on that link, buy us a coffee. We love our coffee over here, and every sip helps keep us grinding to providing these episodes for you. Now, tonight's guest, Coach Dave Bell. He's the head coach of North Hunterdon. He had a 25 career at Bergen Catholic. He's had 11 state championships. He's produced 90 plus state place winners at the NJSIAA wrestling tournament. He's led North Hunterdon to a Group 4 title in just his second season. He's been a USA Wrestling coach under 17 Pan American team. He's committed to building North Hunterdon into a national powerhouse. And what we have on deck for you tonight, we're going to break down North Hunterdon's championship run, Coach Bell's close coaching philosophy and building a winning culture, what it takes to compete at the highest level, why New Jersey wrestling is one of the toughest in the country, and his journey from Bergen Catholic to North Hunterdon. So, without further ado, Coach Bell, thank you for joining us tonight. Welcome to Airey Bros Radio. It is an honor and a pleasure to chat with you.
Same here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And Coach, before we get into it, if there's anything you would like to plug or promote anywhere where the folks can find you on the socials, if you handle that sort of stuff, or if you have someone that handles that for you, anything you want to share with the audience, by all means, the floor is yours.
We have a North Hunterdon Instagram page, a North Hunterdon Wrestling Club page. Outside of that, not too much.
Okay, awesome. And so, Coach, the way we like to start these episodes off with our Jersey wrestling people, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask you this question anyway. Is it pork roll or Taylor ham?
Taylor ham.
That's what I thought.
Coach, and a little bit of a through line. We like to do through lines with our guests to kind of let our audience know how we came upon them, how they came on our radar. So I don't know if you remember this, but you coached me in Team New Jersey. You also coached me at the Maryland Team New Jersey Junior Duels, and my dad.
That was a long time ago. That was a really long time ago.
I believe it was 2003.
Yeah, I think it was that. We had it was. I'm trying to. Brian Nunziato was my wrestler. Brian was on the team.
Okay.
I remember that well.
Yeah. And my dad used to take me to Princeton every Sunday. There used to be like Team New Jersey practices, and you were always there. So I always would see you at Atlantic City, and you'd always remember a kid from Point Pleasant. So that always went a long way with me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, Coach, one thing we like to start off with our guests, especially wrestling coaches, is getting into their origin story, how they got into wrestling, and how that led into their coaching.
So, I mean, I've been around for quite a while, and it was 1972, and we didn't have I grew up in Woodridge, New Jersey, and we didn't have a rec program, and baseball and football was my sport, but I was 82 pounds, and they used to have wrestling and gym, and they used to have the wrestling coach come down, and the weight class was 98. I was 82 pounds. He asked me if I wanted to be on the team, and that was it. No one ever asked me. They gave me a uniform, made me part of the team, and from there on, it was just I fell in love with the sport.
And where did the coaching come in for you? Did you after college start
Uh,
teaching and
so after college, I came home. I volunteered at Woodridge for a while. Um, I officiated for a while, and then my first paid assistant coach job was in 1990 at Hawthorne High School. And then, so I was undecided on a career. I always thought that I wanted to teach. Um, and my love for wrestling just pulled me into teaching. And so I was at Hawthorne for 5 years. I went to Cresskill High School in 1992, came back in 93, 94. Rusty Reed was a senior at Hawthorne. And I was really close with Rusty Reed and head coach Bob Pasquale. They asked me to come back for Rusty's year. Rusty won a state championship that year. And then I went on to Palisades Park. And from there, it was mostly looking for a full-time teaching job and coaching job. So I went to Mawa High School and then Bergen Catholic job. The coach stepped down, John Dorenzo, longtime coach, and two brothers who wrestled and were very successful at Bergen Catholic. Whole part with Jason Hernandez and Team Spider. They were instrumental. They were on that early undefeated team in the 1990s. And that was Mike Hammerly and Dan Hammerly. And Mike was going to take the head coaching position. And he asked me if I wanted to be on staff. They're trying to put together a staff of people that they felt they could really work with. And Mike got really busy, couldn't take the job, and said, well, maybe you should apply. So I applied for the job. I didn't get the job. Joe Sable got the job. Joe Sable was on the Olympic ladder. He's a great coach, went on to do great things at Montclair. And then for whatever reason, Joe turned it down. So I was second choice. And I took the job. That was 1998, 99 at Bergen Catholic. And then I was there till 2023.
So here's another throwback and another through line. I was on Team New Jersey way back when in 1993 with Jason Hernandez.
Okay. So Jason, I remained close with Jason, and John Hernandez's dad was always supportive. He was always at the Bergen Catholic matches. And Rusty Reed and Jason ended up being roommates at Boston University.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So they enjoyed a career together at Boston University. And Jason has a young boy that's wrestling now. Is very good.
Okay. Yeah, as we were getting ready for the show and stuff, I kept thinking David Hernandez, but I think he's a baseball player. I'm like, that's not.
There's there's John and Jason. John's the older brother. Jason was the first Bergen Catholic state champion.
Yep.
So, Coach, you had a dynasty at Bergen Catholic, and then you left, I believe, in 2023 was your last season. And
correct. Yes.
Then you've been at North Hunterdon for 2 years, and you guys just won a state championship. Yeah. Did you think when you left Bergen Catholic, were you looking to coach somewhere else?
When I originally left Bergen Catholic, I thought I thought I needed a break. Shortly thereafter, I realized that I needed to coach, and it was June, and we were moving. My family was moving. I was still in Woodridge. We were out shopping for homes, and North Hunterdon, the job came open. Chris Horonka stepped down, and the job was filled. I remember reading the job was filled. And there was always something about North Hunterdon, and I don't know what it is, but it's always kind of been there in the back of my mind. One morning, whoever took the job, and I can't remember who took the job, decided they stepped back. And Chris Horonka said on an email that there was a social studies position, which I'm a social studies teacher, and the wrestling position was open. I answered him, and within the hour, he responded and asked me if I was serious. And I said, yes, I definitely was. And things just went into motion. We started looking, I interviewed, they made the offer, and we moved down to Hunterdon County. And so it happened pretty quickly.
Did you think that would be such a, I mean, we've been out of New Jersey for quite a while, but I know North Hunterdon has had some pretty good programs, both as from a runner's perspective. They've had some phenomenal runners along the way, but I'm pretty sure they've had some solid wrestling teams along the way. Um, did you think it would be 2 years and you'd be back at the top of Group 4?
They had a lot, they had a great wrestling tradition. And there's a lot of wrestling people still with the program. Ricky Frondorf, who was a two-time state champ, the Wadels, Rudy Wadel, who was a state place finisher. So they're all still in the area, and they all work with the rec program. It was a really healthy rec program. They lost a good amount of seniors. They lost 3 state place finishers. So last year, the expectations weren't too high, but we made it to the group finals. And, we really felt that with what we had and our nucleus coming back and some of the wrestlers coming up, that, we could be competitive.
Coach, how important, I know I'm down in South Carolina, Jimmy's in Florida, and once we lived in Colorado too. Once we left New Jersey, we kind of realized that all wrestling states are not created equal, and not everyone has a wrestling club on every corner and in every town. How important is that rec program and that feeder program for the development of the high school program?
Well, so I've been on both sides. Been on the non-public side where, and I'm not saying that I don't want to get into the public, non-public discussion as much to say as, I could if you want me to,
Okay.
but being on the non-public side, it's not as easy as people think. There's a target group, and wrestlers are looking around. It's getting more and more difficult with the competitive programs. So you're all fishing in the same pool. With the rec program, you have what you have, what you can develop, and you can tailor it, and you can work with it, and develop the wrestler so when they come to high school, they could fit right into the program. But you're not always getting, it's that, are you going to get that steady flow, or are you going to fill the spots from year to year? And I know that it can be it can be like a cycle, and sometimes you could be really up, sometimes you could be down. So the idea is to really keep that rec program healthy, give it attention. Right now we're working on trying to put in a system where what we do in high school, what they do in rec will translate into high school. So it's important to keep it healthy, and it's important to, having the success that we had and making the young wrestlers proud and wanting to come and wanting to represent the high school. So it's not just something that you have and that you just can count on. You have to put work into it, and you have to give it time.
Coach, was there any growing pains in the first 2 years? Did you have any trouble with the kids buying into a new coach, or did they know what they were getting?
I think last year was difficult. Last year was a transitional year, especially for the seniors, because the entire staff was new. So we kind of broke with some of the training traditions, some of the things that they were used to. So that was, but generally I felt, I felt accepted. It was, and still I was finding my footing in the school as a teacher and getting to know the kids. This year, throughout the summer and being able to spend more time with them, it was much more comfortable. I think they got to know me a little better. And I think one of the things that's most important is that you have to gain the trust of your athletes, and you speak truthfully to them, and believe in them. And I think over time that getting to know one another and getting to know that, I was committed to them. And if they were committed to, to success and putting the work in, that they would be successful. And, I feel very fortunate. They're a great group of kids, and they bought in. They started to buy in, and they started to hear what we were saying about being able to compete with anyone. And they rose to the occasion.
Did you know going in this year that this was the year that you guys were going to be able to beat Phillipsburg twice this year?
We believed. Um, it's, I think, part of building a culture. One of the things I remember when I was being hired, and it kind of stuck with me. When I sat down with the athletic director and some of the administrators, and they were asking me, well, you're coming from Bergen Catholic, you're coaching athletes, these really talented, high caliber athletes. What's it going to be like coaching here? And that seemed foreign to me in the sense that, I fully believe that there's really no difference in the athlete. The athletes that walk into that room are not different than the athletes that walked into a Bergen Catholic room. And it's a matter of commitment and making the right decisions and training properly. And I fully believe that, we could compete with anyone, and that they can attain goals and compete at the highest levels. But it does take a sacrifice, and it does take a commitment. But knowing, as a coach, and I have a great coaching staff. I had Andrew Gappis, he's a North Hunterdon alum. He's North Hunterdon through and through, wrestled at Rutgers. Great ethics, great character. Darren Shulman, who was a two-time All-American at Syracuse. Steve Barkman, who's won veterans tournament. He's placed multiple times in the veterans. So it's a good chemistry of coaches that are on the same page. And through that time, and again, that period of getting familiar, I think the kids really see it, and they're starting to believe it.
So, Coach, we know in every season it's like a wave. There's ups and downs. Was there any kind of shaky moments this year? Or was it smooth all the way through?
Well, if you look at our schedule and you look at the group finals, we wrestled about every team that was in the group finals. So we opened up, our first dual meet was against Southern Regional. Our first tournament, so we actually we're about an hour and a half from Manahawk. So on the opening weekend, we went to their Robin Left tournament, which is a great little tournament. Then following that Wednesday, just a few days later, we went back down and competed in a duel against them. And knowing that they were one of the top teams in New Jersey. So, so we had those matches. We opened up with Southern, we had Blair on the schedule. We were the Borscht duels with Delsey. So, we weathered the storm. Sometimes the parents were a little bit like, what are you getting us into? But then our guys were competing, and, they were shining through, and, then everyone started getting behind it. So, we had some good early dual meets, and we had some tough losses along the way. But all of those things, and as a staff, we have bought into that. And, it's something that I always did at Bergen Catholic. It doesn't matter. I'm not so much interested in our team record as in, our preparation and getting ready for the postseason, as a dual team and as individuals. And by this time, going into the team states, we were saying that there's no team that you're going to see that, you're not going to be in for any surprises. You're not going to wrestle any teams tougher than you've already wrestled, and individually and as a team. So, they were prepared.
And that's kind of your job as a coach, right? You want to try to find the kids some losses along the way so that they're ready for when the going gets tough at the end of the season, come down the team tournament and the postseason with the individual, it's you have some of those being battle tested is important, and sometimes you got to go to Manahawkin or Delsey to find some of those, or the Blairstown.
Very important.
Yeah.
Coach Buxton, he's been an inspiration and a friend for a while. And he would always say that, his goal was not to have any undefeated wrestlers. So if you run the gauntlet and you're a Blair and you're undefeated, you're the best in the country. And that's always been something that I followed. That's a philosophy that I followed. And you have to be behind. You have to take a tough loss. You have to know what it's like to be behind in a match, to come back to win a match. Um, and I think that's the best preparation.
Absolutely. Coach, one of the things we're seeing, at least from afar, and even so down here, is we're seeing more and more coaches that aren't teachers or aren't in the buildings. How important is it to be in the building with the athletes and have that contact with them, through the day in school, knowing what's going on, having kind of your finger on the pulse of what they're doing academically and socially within the building?
You know, from my perspective, my experience, I think it's essential.
Mm.
The first year I coached at Bergen Catholic, I was teaching at Morris Catholic, and coming into the building, not knowing the how the day, where their heads were at, what went down during the day, it was nearly impossible. Being in the building was, made a huge difference. And they need, if you're in the building, you know, it's not so much. I mean, North Hunterdon hasn't. It's been a bit of it's been a bit different with the athletes, a little more separation in terms of like. I don't want to say the Bergen Catholic wrestlers were needy, but like if I wasn't in the building, it would have been very difficult. North Hunterdon, it's great being in the building. They know I know if I need to find them, I can. They know where I'm at. I I don't think I could do it being outside of the building.
I agree.
You know,
I've done. Go
knowing
ahead.
the cult, you have to know knowing the culture of the school. Um, and North Hunterdon has been great. North Hunterdon, there's a lot of sports-minded people. They really back their athletic teams. They're big wrestling fans. So it's not just me having to, keep my finger on the pulse. Other teachers will tell me what's going on, and I'm really blessed with great kids that, I haven't had anything that's I haven't had any kind of issue where I had to really intervene. It's just, it's been pretty smooth sailing that way.
Coach, being as successful as you've been as a coach, how do you manage being a teacher and managing being a wrestling coach?
Um, it was like wrestling got me into teaching. It was fun. I never really had ambitions beyond teaching, but wrestling, being a coach, was always driving that ambition. But I really enjoy being a teacher. I don't know how, I don't think I'm as good as teacher as I am a coach, but I try, and I enjoy it. I enjoy the kids. Um, I enjoy my time in the classroom, and I teach history, and I do enjoy history. Keeping up sometimes is a little difficult, like balancing. Like these past couple of weeks, I haven't put as much time into my grading, but but at the same time, it's great because the kids understand, like the kids are seeing, and they're kind of into it and following the program, so it all works out. But I do enjoy the classroom.
Do you have a favorite period of history to teach about?
I do. I like early American history. Like I like from like Revolution or French and Indian War, Revolution, like through the federal period. And that's what I teach. So I'm fortunate to be teaching that.
And you brought up before that you didn't want to get into the public versus private, but we want to get into it a little bit. I'm
Sure.
just
No, go ahead. Ask. I'm fine with that. Go ahead.
I'm just curious, as someone who's been on both sides of it, and now everything we hear from, outsiders' perspective is, oh, it's not fair. These parochial schools are taking over. None of the public schools can compete anymore. What are your thoughts on that now, being at a public school?
So when getting back to my history, when I was hired at Bergen Catholic, I didn't start out. My ambition wasn't so much to go and coach at a non-public school. My desire was to have a teaching position. And after a year at Morris Catholic, Bergen Catholic offered me a teaching position. Once I was there, then I wanted to build the best program that I could build, and modeled after St. Edward's. St. Edward's was like they were the pinnacle, they were the model, and I understood why kids would come to you know, little history when I first started. And when I first started getting into coaching, and if you think back to like the 90s, the non-publics were not the number one teams in the state. That was dominated by public schools.
Mhm.
There was only one non-public up until maybe when Bergen Catholic became number one in the state, and that was Camden Catholic. 1 year, Camden Catholic, I think 2004, was the number one team in the state. But there were the South Hunterdons. I'm sorry, the South Plainfields, the Phillipsburgs. There were the Jersey schools, the Shore schools, Jackson. The non-publics were good, but there was that paradigm shift though when all the clubs started in New Jersey, and kids were going to clubs, and then the idea was, well, they train together at clubs. If they go to a non-public school together, they could still continue to train together. And so I think it wasn't so much the non-publics put that put an emphasis on building the programs. It was the way the whole thing shifted. It was from clubs to how can we train together, and that's how that I think that's how that gradually took shape. So when I got to Bergen Catholic, and I could understand why kids would come and want to train together, why kids would want to be in the same room, and they had the same goals. And and I would hear, I went through 2008 when they wanted to separate. I was on the committee when they wanted to separate the publics and the non-publics, saying that it wasn't fair. And then that got knocked down, and then it came back later. So being on the public side, you know, I tell our kids that we want to compete with them, and as I was saying earlier, with that same if I'll tell a quick story. So everyone knows at Bergen Catholic, you had your Nick Surianos, Shane Griffiths, Chris Focas. People can speak about our real storied wrestlers, but there were wrestlers that came into the program that they weren't at that level, but being in that environment and seeing how it was done, they raised themselves to that level. I had a wrestler, Sage Moscow, came to Bergen Catholic. His freshman year, I don't think he won a JV match. Sophomore year, he started. He had little success, but between the sophomore and junior year, he transformed himself. By his senior year, he was in the state semifinals. Last year, I had a young man, and these are just a few examples, by the name of Jaden Isnaga. And for 3 years, he never started a varsity match. He came in being a good athlete. He was from Hawthorne. He was in the Hawthorne Rec. Wasn't really a club kid, but once he got to Bergen Catholic and once he started training in the room, his eyes were opened and he started working really hard and didn't break the lineup. Senior year, he was in the state semifinals. So, these are athletes. So if I'm pointing, I tell my North Hunterdon kids, like, they're no different than, there's no difference. The bodies that come into the North Hunterdon room, and I'd say, for the most part, for most high schools, they're athletes. It's it's making them buy in and believe that if they put the time in, if they train, if they're really committed, that they can make those things happen. And so I'm in the business now, and trying to get our kids to believe that they can aspire to that and they can compete. When I first started at Bergen Catholic, we wanted to wrestle. We just started wrestling Blair, and there were 50-point deficits, 40-point deficits, 20-point deficits, until we finally caught them and beat them. And it was that same progression. They were, why are we doing this? Why are we wrestling these teams? Why do we have to wrestle Blair? Until we want to wrestle Blair, until we are as good as Blair. Um, you know, I feel very fortunate to have done that. And I'm not saying that it's easy. It took 20 years to do it, but I really believe that, you know, I really believe that I want to, you can coach. I think you can coach logically when you send someone out on the mat against someone that's really superior. And, logically, you don't, you most likely they're not going to be successful. You can coach with your heart, and you can just believe and believe. Um, so you have to kind of, you know, walk that fine line between the two, and make your kids, or say make your kids, but instill that belief in them. And you may fall short. We may never be able to compete and beat any of the top non-publics, but we're going to try.
Do you feel like it's just kind of an ebb and flow of how the sport goes, where, you know, sometimes it's, when I was coming up, when I first started, it was more of like North Jersey was a little bit more dominant, and then it started to trickle down, and Region 6 had their kind of run, and South Jersey's had their Paulsboro in different times. And so do you think the same thing with public versus non-public, that we'll see an ebb and a flow, where maybe we'll get more teams in the public schools back to the top of the heap?
You're seeing teams like Southern this year, Rumson Fairhaven, is in the mix. But looking nationally, you see teams like Poway. There's Stillwater. There's teams around the country that are public schools. I mean, and probably because of their success, people do move into the district to wrestle. But they're competing. Buchanan, Clovis. When I was at Bergen Catholic, we went out and competed with those schools. They were large public schools, but they had the same mission, and they never shied away from they never bought into the public, non-public. And now, like, and when we're talking about the ebb and flow, I don't think too much about it. I just, when I'm doing it, I'm just kind of like hyper focused on what we're doing and trying to make our kids as competitive as possible.
Yeah. It is kind of funny though, because, some of those schools that are hemming and hawing a little bit, they weren't necessarily upset when people were moving into their towns, so they could,
No, there's some
so they
schools
could,
that had a lot of kids move in.
yeah, they'll
Um,
remain nameless.
yes, absolutely. And I don't begrudge them for that. They,
Sure.
whatever they were doing, they were doing the right thing, and they were drawing kids in.
Yeah, and I think it also stems back to kind of what you were saying with the rise of the wrestling club in New Jersey. There, back in the day, maybe it was a little bit smaller. You had a few less where those kind of connections, or kids on Team New Jersey were connecting and building friendships, and that's how those kind of relationships started, or people were relocating. I'm curious, we know of our clubs down in the Shore area, and we talked about the rec program at North Hunterdon. Are there clubs in your area that kids are going to as well?
Uh, In the Hunterdon County, Warren County area, there really aren't as many clubs. It's not a proliferation like in North Jersey. There are so many, and they all compete, and kids go from club to club. Um, there's Yale Street. A lot of our kids go to Yale Street. That's in Piscataway, I believe. It's not really, you know, it's not local. It's not far. It's about 40 minutes. There's some clubs in Pennsylvania. I think there's a club, not a large club, but there's a club maybe like in the Flemington area, but not a real, well, I think I think there's Rhino, I think is close by. I don't know exactly where Rhino is. There's a few Rhinos. I know Rodney Van Ness has a club that's kind of in the area that some of our kids have been to, but not near as many as in other parts of New Jersey. Our kids have to travel. Most of the kids that we do have, the bulk of our kids that do go to clubs go to Yale Street.
Shout out to Donnie D, former guest of
Yes,
Airey Bros Radio. He is a
And
great
Dan
guy.
Hill.
Donnie D
Yeah,
is a
and
great
Dan
guy.
Hill. Coach, being at Bergen Catholic, having all the success you've had, and then going to North Hunterdon, and I know you said you got a little bit of a blueprint. Was there anything you wanted to change that you weren't maybe able to change because it became part of the culture at Bergen Catholic that when you came into North Hunterdon that you wanted to implement or take away?
Um, you know, um, in terms of, you know, I guess wading through like I think like public, maybe I'm gonna say maybe not so much rules, but procedure. Like procedure in the public schools. Like there's things you can do, things you can't do. I mean, not things. I'm not talking about. I'm not talking like stepping over line guidelines and breaking rules. It's just things are done a little bit differently. So you have to kind of learn the lay of the land. In terms of coaching, that didn't change. That we same approach to coaching. Just like we weren't able to travel this year, we wanted to travel. I guess, only my second year in, I guess they're not used to teams really traveling. So, we're still working on being able to travel out of state. We'd really like to travel back to California next year to compete, give these kids an experience. So that was the only difference. That's the only thing where haven't been able to. That was the only thing that I was able to do pretty readily at Bergen Catholic. That here is a bit of a challenge.
So when we talk to a lot of our college coaches, we ask them how they take the CEO position of their team. And obviously, you're a full-time teacher, so that's a big part of something you have to navigate through as far as running the team. But you also mentioned having all the great coaches that you have. So how do you run your role as the CEO of North Hunterdon?
Um, so what I do is, every day I have a practice plan, write out a practice plan. Um, I, I'll dictate it. I'll speak to the team. I have a lot of trust and faith in our coaches. I'll discuss the plan, what we're going to be doing that day, what our emphasis is, and then I'll let the coaches do their role. I'm at the age where it doesn't look pretty when I do technique anymore. I always told myself there's going to be a day when, I wish I could, but, the body's willing or the spirit's willing, the body's not. So I don't mind. I don't mind relinquishing that role. But it works pretty smoothly. And, so everyone has their role and everyone, we mesh well. But it is more like, being a Bergen Catholic, taught me a lot about being the CEO of the sport because there was a lot to wrap your arms around. There was a lot of where at North Hunterdon, it's more pure coaching. At Bergen Catholic, not that it wasn't pure coaching, but you had to work yourself. There were a lot of different things you had to work around. A lot of who's coming, who's leaving, and just kind of it was like running like it's like running a major corporation.
Coach, talking about the coaching and practice, you know, you have kids that are at a high level, whether they're, district place winners or region place winners or state place winners, but you also have some kids that might be coming from another sport or a friend talks them out. They're a good athlete. Hey, this might be a good fit where you're dealing with some inexperienced kid. How do you approach coaching different skill levels in the same room?
Um, so we never, whether it be at Bergen Catholic, and getting back to like just to touch upon that a bit, like there we would have kids at Bergen Catholic that would be first year wrestlers. Not everyone was coming in with experience. We never broke up the room. We practiced as a team. Um, Transitioning to North Hunterdon, where you have different skill levels, we treat everyone, we treat practice the same. We teach the same, and we practice at the same time. We don't, the focus is, the focus for the past couple of years is just position. We're focusing on different positions. So we're not necessarily teaching a drop step and different things. We have skill drills like scaffolding drills that the whole team does, and we work a lot on fixing positions, like getting those very basic positions down, and then, introducing our skills and building our skills upon those positions, and not slowing it down or speeding it up, but just being consistent throughout. And, you know, from the least experience to the most experience, um, you know, it, it was a pretty smooth process. I've seen, I've, I've seen great progress with some of the younger kids that had never been on a wrestling mat before, and I've seen our other kids really progress in those positions. So the formula is working for us.
And have you been able to get some crossover between some football players or maybe some other athletes from other sports that you've been able to convince the coaches that wrestling is going to make you a better athlete as a football player or maybe a baseball player?
Our wrestler this year, we have a junior, Anthony DeSimone, who wrestled 215 for us. What I understand, he came out. So last year he was a sophomore. My first year, he came out as a freshman. At the end of the year, his younger, well, I shouldn't say his twin brother. One's a 215, one's like a 165. They're unlikely twins. But he wrestled, so the brother came out and tried it, but he never wrestled a match. And then last year he came out and he was actually a baseball player, football player, three-sport athlete, dropped baseball, still love wrestling, still love football, but then wrestling started like becoming equal to football. And this year he's under 500, but he was injured for a while, and his match cinched us the state championship against Phillipsburg. He's a good athlete. He's got a good frame, and he's progressing nicely. And by the time he's a senior, even this year, I believe he's going to be a state qualifier and with a real good opportunity by a senior year to get a state medal. So he's kind of fallen in love with the sport. Still loves football, but wrestling is neck and neck with football.
Nice. Don't let the football coach hear that.
Yeah, I was at Bergen Catholic. I was really fortunate. Every football coach, it was a past wrestling coach. So
Nice.
they always encourage their kids to wrestle. Even when it was summer, even when you're a Bergen Catholic football player, you start in January lifting, and then by the spring you're doing your skill drills, and by summer, you're almost in full swing. But it was Nunzio Campanile and Vito Campanile brothers. Both were very good wrestlers. They would say, and I tell our football coach or any football coach or wrestling coach that has difficulty with their football coaches, that they would say, hey, you're competing. You're out there competing. You got our blessings. So that was always a good environment. And at North Hunterdon, the new football coach he's 100% behind wrestling, and so we're trying to get all the big guys out. But
Good.
there's cross pollination and there's support.
Yeah.
And the idea that, the big thing is, I want to lift and get bigger. I don't want to lose weight. And it's like, no, just come out. You don't have to lose weight. And you know what? If you don't feel like you're ready to compete, don't compete. Just come out and compete and practice. Get conditioned, get better, see if you like it. And if you don't like it, we can part ways and, just with, I'll respect your decision. So, selling it like that.
Coach, being someone who's coached Team New Jersey for numerous years, and when you do that, you have to put in a lot of time. What are your thoughts? Do you prefer if the guys are single sport athletes, or do you think having diversity helps?
I think diversity helps. When I was at Bergen Catholic, and the numerous parents would come up to me. We'd have our meetings, we'd have our open houses, and they would say, "What do you think?" Because the idea, or I guess sometimes they could have the perception was that if they came, they would have to be, they'd have to commit themselves to one sport. I think it's great to play other sports. I think having other coaches, getting other coaching philosophies, developing other skills. I think it's good. I think it's healthy. And if you decide to play one sport, it should be your decision. It shouldn't be. It shouldn't be another coach's decision. Um, Probably shouldn't be your parents' decision. It should be your decision, whether that's what you want to pursue. And especially at a school like Bergen Catholic, I would tell kids, especially your freshman year, because they're freshmen, every sport had a freshman team. Go out and enjoy the year, play the sport, and if you love it and you want to stick with it, do it. You can still train for wrestling. And you could still find the time to train.
Rich, I know you like to hear that.
I do. I do. I was going to say, on the flip side of that, coach, if you have a kid who's a wrestler but that maybe isn't interested in doing other sports, how do you get them and encourage them to maybe look into freestyle and Greco? Maybe that hasn't been on their radar up until that point, but I don't want to say they're like half in or half out, but they're just not necessarily a year-round wrestler, but there's nothing else that they're really interested in from a sports perspective. How do you get them into the buy into the year-round perspective?
Um, at Bergen Catholic, for as many really talented wrestlers we had, and a lot of them wrestled freestyle, and a lot of them very successful in freestyle. Not all of them fell in love with it. And, I encouraged and I pushed freestyle because freestyle is my favorite of all the styles. But I understood that if they wanted to just there's so many folk style opportunities. So there were folk style opportunities to pursue. Um, and then, in North Hunterdon, um, I'm again the culture. They do most of the wrestlers. They compete year round. They go down to the NHCA duels. Uh, that's an annual thing that they do. They enter a lot of team tournaments. Freestyle, on the other hand, is something that really wasn't on their radar. So, I've been pushing the freestyle and the Greco. Last year, we had 3 North Hunterdon athletes go to Fargo. This year the goal is to get more, and I really believe that um, to make those incremental jumps or incremental gains, freestyle is the way to go. I think any wrestler that's come back has come back not just with the experience of the sport, but just the experience of being open to seeing the best wrestlers around the country and training with the best wrestlers. And that in itself goes a long way to you know to developing athletes.
Yeah, that Team New Jersey, that Fargo experience is unbeatable. It's great um, for the development and just like you said, to see the experience, to see the athletes from all over the country. You know, still some of my fondest memories. I only did it once, but I can remember the people from our area that we roomed with, the singlet trading and even one of the Brett Tulo, he even wrestled Jeff McGinnis, and he had him on the ropes for a while. And it's just, yeah, just memories from 1994 or 1993 that, still stay with me. I think Jimmy even wore some of my singlet trades at certain points when he was coming up.
I had a pair of Fargo team North
North
Dakota
Dakota.
sweatpants that I destroyed. Like they were at least like 13 years old by the time they were done. But to your point, Rich, I think Fargo for me, for anyone listening, I just feel like that was the rite of passage. And I came back that next season and I just had another confidence to me. And it might have been a placebo effect that I thought I was better because I wrestled in the summer and beat some state champs from other places, but it just gave me another confidence.
Or it does. It transforms kids. What I would love about it, I would go and there would be kids. I would meet all. Part of it, it's not. It's the wrestling, but it's the social aspect of it, and it's meeting kids from all over the state and forming bonds. And you'd see them in Fargo, and you'd enjoy their company. And then come March, you go down the states, and you see all those familiar faces. Kids that hadn't qualified for states before. It seemed like the majority of those kids, made that jump, and I really think that that experience really helped, really enhanced, really helped them do it.
Yeah.
Coach, I am interested. You guys won at the rack on Sunday, and for a period of time, the states were in Trenton, and then they were at the Rataco Center. Do you have a favorite venue?
So I've been, I've been discussing now with some people. The first year that we won was 19 was I'm sorry 2002. We were in Trenton, and we beat Christian Brothers. The next year we were back in Trenton in 2003, and that was Camden Catholic. And then in subsequent years, um, you know, we were at the Rataco Center. The Rataco Center was I like Trenton. We went. The Rataco Center was okay. Um, we always hoped we went back to Trenton, but when we did go back to Trenton, it just wasn't the same for whatever reason. The last championship that we were at, that I was at Bergen Catholic, was at Franklin, and this was my first experience at Rutgers, and by far Rutgers, being in the rack was the best environment by far. It was just, there was a great crowd. Just uh, everything about it was top notch. So I think New Jersey made a great move by bringing it to the rack.
Yeah, I think that's a great experience for the kids, like the high school football kids. They get to play at Giant Stadium. I feel like
Yeah,
that's the equivalent for the wrestlers is wrestling at Rutgers.
yeah, it's a big deal. The kids were excited about going to the university, going to Rutgers, and everything. It was very professional. They treated us very well. Not have just having the floor for wrestling mats and fans up top was, you know, that made it made it a better environment.
Was everyone wrestling simultaneously, Coach?
So this year it was, they used to do it when they did it at the Rataco Center. They would do that the semifinal round. So non-publics would wrestle. I mean, I'm sorry, publics would wrestle two matches in a day. They wrestle semifinals and finals in the same day. In the morning, and then they would have an afternoon finals, and then a later afternoon finals. Um, this year, they wrestled all the semifinals. Well, the public semifinals on Friday night. So groups 1, 2, 3, and parochial B, they had four mats. So 1, 2, 3, and parochial B wrestled in the 12:30 session, I think it was. They wrestled simultaneous, and then the afternoon it was groups 4, 5, and parochial A. So there was one mat open, and all the other teams wrestled simultaneous. Bridgewater and Southern wrestled across the way, we were parallel, we were adjacent or right next to Del Barton and St. Joe's. So it was pretty exciting at that point. So one match had finished early. So our two matches were going on and they were both really competitive to the end. And what I was told that the St. Joe's fans and the North Hunterdon fans kind of they they kind of joined in cheering for one another. So we had a great cheering session. So whenever something happened for St. Positive for St. Joe's, the North Hunterdon student section and the Joe's student section were cheering, and the same for North. So it was loud. It was deafening loud. It was a great crowd.
Yeah, it's a fun environment. It's fun when you see people getting behind other people. Kind of same thing down in Atlantic City, where maybe you guys are foes with certain people during the year, but then you become friends when you're, you know, supporting your same region or your same district or your same county or whatever. Those are fun
Yes.
environments to be a part of. Another thing we like to ask Coach, and again, we're all biased on here because we're Jersey guys. Um, where do you see in the high school ranks where do you truly see New Jersey in the heap of things?
Um, so I went to college in Pennsylvania. I went to college in Slippery Rock State College, that now Slippery Rock University. Um, at the time when I went, they had a very good wrestling program. They've
Mhm.
since dropped the program. A couple of my friends that were New Jersey wrestlers stayed out in Pennsylvania, and they became real pro Pennsylvania and real down on New Jersey, which I thought was like, guys, you wrestled in New Jersey. But in full transparency, I think Pennsylvania has, I think they have an edge on New Jersey, but I think New
Sure.
Jersey is right there. So I'm gonna say like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Ohio, um, you know, are pretty much, I think, I'm gonna say that the top three. California has really strong pockets. We went out. We've experienced a Doc Buchanan. There's a lot of good wrestling in California. There's good pockets of wrestling all around, but I think New Jersey, you know, I think is, I would say, a close number two to Pennsylvania. But in any argument, they have to be in the top five.
Yeah. You think the single individual state champion adds to the street cred?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And people have told me, people like on different media, like some of the, I know some of the people from Flow, and they've been to the different tournaments. And even though Pennsylvania is a larger state tournament with one champion, I think they still give the edge to New Jersey. So yeah, I think that's something that, a lot of things change, and that should never change. There should always be state championship in New Jersey.
I agree.
Have you heard anything about that changing, or people tell me that's just spreading rumors?
That's one thing I haven't heard. The
Good.
only the last, right now we take four, top region four, top four into states. What I've heard, and it may just be rumors that that may change in time and go back to three. And that may be a product of of time and efficiency when, as the girls tournament grows, and if they keep them together, they may sacrifice that one to be able to accommodate both. But that's the only, I haven't heard anything about New Jersey splitting into like two separate divisions. When they wanted to do the ninth region with the parochials, that I don't know how that would have went. Um, I don't know if that would eventually change things, and hopefully that never crops up again. But I haven't heard anything about dividing the state.
Well, Coach, I'm glad you brought up that fourth place and that ninth region. I'm curious to what you think about. Do you think it should be three? Do you think it should be four? And what are your thoughts on the realignment of the regions?
The current realignment, the way
Yeah.
they, um, well, for the four, I'm a wrestling guy, and there's arguing that it waters down the states, and that what are the statistics and how many fourth place wrestlers actually place. But I think it just gives the kids opportunity to go and to wrestle, and I'm all for that. And and now being able, whether I was at a non-public or a public, you have a fourth place kid. It's great. The more kids that go to the tournament and get that opportunity to wrestle, I don't see a downside to it. And if they're if the statistics don't bear it out, like those kids are winning, but who knows? But one thing that they may never have taken into consideration is that that wrestler that does take fourth and does get to go as an underclassman, what does that do for him? In his, it could be a freshman who does that, and how does that translate into his progress over the years? Um, Having a non-public region, um, you know, there are strong arguments on both sides. And when I was before they realigned the regions, like region one, I'm sorry, region two was Bergen Catholic, St. Joe's, Paramus Catholic. We were all in the same region. Don Bosco, sorry, four non-publics were in region two before they did the region realignment. So if you have those four non-publics, and at the time, Paramus Catholic was, they weren't on the rise at that time. Don Bosco was very good at that time. St. Joe's had been very good, Bergen Catholic. So, to get that third spot, that was a challenge. So I can understand how the public coaches were feeling about like going into the regions and kind of being boxed out, because there was just the volume of really good wrestlers in a weight class. So I think the redistribution, the way they did it, you have the traditionalists that say, well, you don't have the rivalries in the districts. And, what I said when I was a Bergen Catholic, when they proposed it, and again, we were pretty much at our apex at that time when that went in, when that was discussion was had. And actually all the non-publics met at Bergen Catholic, the non-public head coaches, and they discussed the plan. They said, if we do this, would you be amenable to travel to do what you need to do? And I think collectively we all said, hey, that's what we need to do. That's what we'll do. And they already had the plan kind of in place. They showed us how they would be realigned, so we were all for it. And I think it was a better alternative than having a region 9. Is it an inconvenience? It's not easy to travel away to a district that's an hour away. But I don't know what the best solution is. I know that they're trying to make it work. There are advocates on both sides, and for me, it's just tell us where we have to go, we'll wrestle. I think that makes it easy that way.
Yep. Yeah. No doubt. Well, I guess, Coach, before we get you out of here, let's hear about, you mentioned districts are on Friday. We talk about alignments and districts and regions and stuff. So which district is North Hunterdon in? How's it looking? And then what region does that throw you guys into as well? And how's it looking for that?
So they did, now they're going to realign, I think, and I could be mistaken on this. I think the original plan was every 2 years. Now I think they're going to change. They'll reevaluate every year. We were moved out of the district that we were in last year. Now we're in District 14. We happen to be hosts this year. We're in District 14, Region 4. So our district, we have Bridgewater in our district. That's probably the next most competitive team. They were a Group 5 finalists. I think it looks pretty good for us. Our region, we have Paramus Catholic and Seton Hall Prep are the two non-publics. Delaware Valley's in our region, so we have a pretty competitive region. But I think it looks good for us. I think we can move a good amount to the regions and to the states.
Any particular individuals we need to keep an eye out for?
So we have a sophomore, Aiden Yarusi, who was a state wrestleback three or state wrestleback two. I'm sorry, state wrestleback two last year. He's having a great year. He's only lost to state place finishers. He's at 132. Uh, Evan Kinney, who's a senior, who was a state qualifier last year, has 3 losses this year. He's been very solid. Our 106 Caden Wadle is making some noise. He's had some big wins. We have some guys that if they catch fire at the right time, which they are, they're peaking, can give guys some headaches. So I'm confident that we can have some medal contention at the states.
All right. Well, I don't think any short conference teams are in Region 4, so we'll be rooting
No,
for
they are no short conference
we'll be
team.
rooting for North Hunterdon in Region 4 for sure, right, Jim?
Thank you.
Definitely, and it will give us another region to watch this year. For
That's
sure.
absolutely.
I appreciate that.
Coach, one last thing I have for you before we get into the Final Four. You had mentioned them during this podcast. You had coached 2 wrestlers who wound up being NCAA champs. Most high school coaches don't even have kids that are NCAA All-Americans. What was that like for you to watch 2 of your guys who you coached in high school become NCAA champs?
It's really the 2 athletes in question are, they were exceptional high school wrestlers, exceptional young men. Both I still keep in contact with. The sense of pride to see them both achieve their goals and at the highest level was, it's incomparable. I'm very fortunate, very grateful to have just been part of their career, at any level. And exceptionally proud of them as how they've developed as young men. One thing about both of them, I mean, Nick is just Nick has that mystique. He has his handsome Tuesday, and he just has a following. And people love Nick, and his watching him train and watching his high school career was certainly a privilege. There's an argument or discussion now in the newspapers, that Anthony Knox is going for his 4th. And, the discussion is like the media loves to, the journalists love to compare and, try to get a story. And, they did speak to me briefly about, who do you think is better? And, I don't like to get into, I don't think you can quantify that really because they're both great in their own right. But to speak of Nick, like he was only scored upon once in his whole high school career, which when you think about that, that's truly amazing. He took one bad shot in the Beast quarterfinals, got put to his back, fought off his back, won the match, and was never scored upon again. And I don't even think anyone touched his legs beyond that one, and it was a defensive takedown. And he wrestled in the Beast. He wrestled all over the country, so his unblemished record was well earned. And then when he got to college, it was like he didn't slow down. Shane Griffith, I would sit in his corner and I would just marvel in high school. Besides supporting him, I think he was so talented, and Nick too. It was just a matter of just like being there to support them in their goals. Shane, beyond being an incredible competitor, and for me, one of the most exciting wrestlers to watch is the young man that he was. If you watch any of his matches, whether at any level of competition, just watch the nationals. Every opponent at the end of a match, there'd be a smile, there'd be an embrace. Um, he's just an incredible young man, and beyond having them achieve that highest level and being national champs, just to see them, just to see them develop as young men was like, that's the epitome of my career, I think. And I can't take credit for their success. Only I could just be grateful to have been part of it. And yeah, it's when and I don't, it's not name dropping, but when some of the kids new to wrestling, and when they start getting into wrestling at North Hunterdon, they say, "You coach Nick Suriano?" Yeah, I was the coach then. So it's a kick for them. Just that transference of like, wow, you were there with him. So it's breathing rarefied air to have been around those two. And and you have Chris Foca, who's a third, and Jacob Cardenas is, he's in the running. There's AJ Ferrari out there. He spent time with us. I love AJ, so and we still keep in touch. And so yeah, I've been very, very fortunate.
Street cred goes a long way with the kids. That carries a lot of weight with them. They get on board real quick when they hear some of those names.
They do. It helps. It does help. I can tell you a quick funny story. In Woodridge, town I lived in, there was a pizza parlor, and I walked into the pizza parlor and I look on the walls, and there's photos of wrestlers. I'm saying, who owns this pizza parlor? Steve Mocco was on the wall. There were a couple of New Jersey State champs on the wall. I kept going back there and never met the owner. So one day I met the owner. We started talking. He wrestled. He wrestled for Palisades Park, and he eventually became a big fan. He became a big fan and follower of Bergen Catholic. But when he first met me, he'll tell the story. He said, "Man, because I didn't believe he was the head coach of Bergen Catholic." He can't be the head. You the head coach? Yeah, I'm the head.
Only in New Jersey, you're walking into a pizza parlor and there's state champs and national champs on the wall,
Yeah.
autographed. Rich, you got anything else for Coach before we get in the Final Four?
Well, Coach, I just really appreciate you sharing your time with us and telling some of the stories and talking about the new program. It's always great to connect with a New Jersey coaching legend and get some insight on how you operate and how you do things and just sharing all that stuff. So we do appreciate you joining us tonight, and I wish you the best of luck as you go into districts and regions.
Well, thank you. It was a true pleasure being on, and I'm honored to be on. And thank
Thank
you.
you.
Can we got time for the Final Four, Coach?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes.
All right. First one I got for you. Are you a coffee drinker?
I'm drinking coffee right now.
Oh, brave man. How do you brew your
It's got to
coffee
do
and how
some
do you take
grading.
it?
I've done a few different things. Percolated. Then I was a French press guy for a long time, and now it's just the Keurig. Now it's just simple.
You take it
Right.
black?
Well, I not black. I used to take it like really light and sweet with so much cream and sugar that you really couldn't taste the coffee.
Yep. I've
I've
been
been
there.
dieting, so now it's just cream and coffee, no sugar.
You got decaf this late in the evening, or you're just going?
It's going straight.
Wow,
Yeah.
good for you. Good for you. Coach, do you have any daily practices or rituals you do on a regular basis to show up as the strongest version of Dave Bell?
Um, Prayer in the morning. Faith is a big thing. Getting myself prepared for the day, making sure that I'm doing things for the right reasons, that I'm grateful for my opportunities, and that I'm making the best decisions for my athletes.
Awesome. Thank you.
Coach, what are you listening to right now? Music, podcasts, audiobooks? Are you reading anything?
God, I wish I loved to read, and I wish I could. It's like I have ADHD off the charts. So when it's wrestling season in the summer, I try to like I try to read a book in the summer, and I try to read something history oriented, um, nonfiction. a history, something about history, some period in history. Music all the time, whenever I can. Not as much as I used to. In the mornings when I'm up, annoying my wife, and then in the car always. Um, so that's, yeah, music is a staple, and trying to read. Not always successful. There were summers I would just go and I'd buy a bunch of books and have a plan to read, and sometimes I would, sometimes I would.
Do
Been
you
there.
have do you have a particular artist or genre you like to listen to, or you're all over the place?
All over the place. Yeah, it depends. Some I'll get obsessed and I'll have something like that I'll just play in a loop over and over again.
Are you allowing music in the room?
Yeah, I do a lot of music in the room.
Do you let them
Um,
control it or do you control it?
I let them control it. Last year, it was a little bit more to my taste. It was a little bit more, on the rock side. This year, it's a little more on the rap side. Bergen Catholic, for the longest time, it was on the rap side. So part of, for me, like, it was having to endure that. Sometimes it was difficult to make it through like a whole hour, whole 2 hours of, but yeah, we managed today. Sometimes they ask for no music, like the past couple of days going into team states and now preparing for districts. We've been without music.
Okay. All right. Nothing like breathing heavy to get you dialed in, right, Jim?
Yep, I'll get you there.
Coach, last what we got for you is a little lighthearted. It could be a food. We talked about pizza before. Do you have a guilty pleasure?
Potato chips,
Okay. All right.
potato chips. And again, being on a diet, I've been doing like a keto diet.
Good for you.
It's been no potato chips, but potato chips are like, that's my Achilles heel. Like
All right. All right. Any particular brand or style? You like salt and vinegar, maybe some
I,
barbecue, cheddar cheese?
all of them,
All
all
of
of
them.
them,
All right.
all of them, and probably like when it gets like right down to brass tacks, it would be like original Ruffles.
Okay.
All
I'll
right.
get down with some ruffles.
Yeah, sure.
I do like a good kettle cooked chip though.
I love, yeah, the kettle chips too.
Yeah. Have you ever dabbled in making your own?
Never. It's a
Never.
thought though. It's a
Okay.
thought, but I haven't.
All right.
Coach Bell, thank you so much for taking time. I'm super stoked we got to get this in tonight. Sorry about the confusion with the time, but super stoked you got to make time for us tonight, and best of luck to the team going forward for the rest of the year.
Jimmy, thank you for having me. I mean, I'm honored, and I was glad to take the time. It was very enjoyable. Thank you.
Yeah, Coach, it was an honor, pleasure to meet you and chat with you and pick your brain a little bit about all the good things you got going on at North Hunterdon. And like I said, we do wish you the best of luck as you head into the postseason with the guys and give them all the wish them a little bit of luck from the Airey Bros.
Thank you. Come see us.
Absolutely. Next time we're in Jersey, we got a list of people to check off to come see and some programs to go do some footage for.
All right.
All
We'd
right,
love to
y'all.
host you.
Thank you. All right, y'all. That was Coach Dave Bell. We do appreciate you joining us this week for our episodes. Next week, we'll be back on Monday night with Derek Booth. Will be joining us from North Idaho College. He's the head wrestling coach there. So we're going back on the mat next week, going belly to belly. And one last thing, we would like to give a shout out to Coach Ruff over at the University of Cumberland's for outfitting the Prince and I over there in our new suite University of Cumberland's gear. So we do appreciate that, Coach Ruff. And y'all have a great